The merger documents were a shield. I buried myself in due diligence, letting the language of acquisition protect me from the woman across the aisle. Chloe. She didn't have a laptop open. She just watched, with an unflinching stillness that made the cabin feel dangerously intimate. The jet's hum, usually calming, felt like a third participant in this forced proximity. My best friend Sarah's voice echoed in my memory. You need someone who sees past your spreadsheets. I hadn't believed her, but now, with the air between us already charged, I felt the weight of it. We hadn't spoken, yet the silence was loud. The vintage, Chloe said. Her voice was low, cutting through the engine drone with terrifying clarity. Does it breathe the way you expected? It was a simple question, a social question, the kind normal people answered with a smile. But my hands, usually steady enough to sign contracts worth millions, fumbled with the stem of the glass. Wine wasn't a metric, it was an experience, and I didn't have a slide deck for experiences. I stared at the deep red liquid, swirling it too aggressively, watching vivid streaks coat the crystal. It's a 2015, I said, my voice tight. The market valuation for this particular vineyard has seen a steady 12% increase over the last 3 quarters. Supply chain constraints in the region actually worked in their favor, creating artificial scarcity. I heard myself speaking. I heard how hollow the words sounded, how they clattered against the intimacy of the small cabin, like dropped coins. I was retreating. It was a tactical withdrawal into the only territory where I felt safe. Facts, figures, defensible positions. I could explain ROI. I couldn't explain why my pulse spiked when she looked at me. Chloe didn't interrupt. She didn't nod politely or pretend to care about the supply chain constraints of French vineyards. She just held her glass, her gaze unflinching. She saw the performance. She saw the armor plating I was frantically bolting into place, and she simply let it hang there in the air between us. She was a strategist, Sarah had told me. She knew how to wait. The silence that followed my monologue stretched. It wasn't empty. It was heavy, weighted with her patience and my rising panic. In the boardroom, silence is a power move. Here, at 30,000 feet, it felt like exposure. I needed to fill it. I needed to drown out the quiet pull I felt from her side of the aisle. Actually, I continued, breathless now, desperation creeping into my tone. If you look at the acquisition strategy for their parent company, they're pivoting toward a direct-to-consumer model, which should stabilize their margins against currency fluctuation. I was rambling. I was throwing data points like chaff from a fighter jet, trying to confuse the radar. Chloe shifted. She leaned forward, just an inch or two, but in the confined space, it felt like she had crossed a border. A scent drifted toward me, something clean, expensive, and maddeningly subtle. It wasn't perfume, it was just her. It smelled like rain on pavement and something warmer, something like skin heated by the sun. It invaded my sterile, calculated space, dismantling my focus with effortless precision. Stella, she said. She didn't ask me to stop. She just said my name. Not Miss CEO, not ma'am, just Stella. The syllables felt different in her mouth, softer, yet commanding. I stopped talking. The data points died in my throat. You're telling me about the market, she said softly, her eyes tracking the nervous movement of my fingers against the glass. I asked you about the wine. The distinction was sharp, precise. She wasn't interested in the asset. She was interested in my reaction to it. She was looking for a human pulse, under the corporate strategy. I looked away, staring out the window at the darkening sky, unable to meet that knowing look. It's robust, I managed, the word feeling clumsy. It is, she agreed. She took a sip, her eyes never leaving my profile. It's complex. It needs time to open up. You can't rush it. The double meaning landed with the weight of a physical touch. My heart hammered against my ribs, a traitor to my composed exterior. I realized then, with a jolt of terrifying clarity, that I had been talking for 5 minutes straight to avoid a question she hadn't even asked yet. She wasn't trying to break the ice. She was waiting for it to melt. And in the heat of her gaze, I could feel the first rivets of my armor popping loose. She saw me. Not the title, not the net worth. She saw the woman hiding behind the quarterly projections, and she wasn't looking away. I needed a wall, a physical, tangible barrier between her perception and my vulnerability. My hand dove into my leather satchel, fingers curling around the cold aluminum of the laptop. It was a reflex, a survival mechanism honed in high-pressure negotiations where emotion was a liability and data was the only currency that mattered. If I could put a screen between us, I could reclaim the narrative. I could be the CEO again, not the woman trembling because someone understood wine better than she did. I snapped the lid open. The blue light washed over my face, harsh and familiar. It was the color of safety. I pulled up the merger due diligence, the rows of black numbers on white cells forming a grid that made sense. Logic, order, predictability. I stared at the EBITDA adjustments, willing the numbers to anchor me, to stop the room from spinning around the axis of Chloe's gaze. I typed a meaningless note in the margin, the click of the keys a rhythmic defense system against the intimacy she offered. But staring at a screen didn't make her disappear. It didn't stop the air from feeling thick with her presence. I heard the rustle of paper, not from across the aisle, but from right beside me. I stiffened. Chloe hadn't stayed in her seat. She had moved. She had crossed the narrow divide of the aisle and settled into the plush leather chair directly to my right. She didn't say a word. She simply opened a physical folder, the hard copy of the exact same document I was staring at digitally, and smoothed it out on the table between us. Then she leaned back. Her shoulder brushed mine. It was a grazing touch, barely a collision of physics, but the impact was catastrophic. Through the wool of my blazer and the silk of her blouse, a current arced. Hot, sharp, and undeniable. It wasn't just contact, it was a claim. My breath hitched, caught in a throat that had suddenly gone dry. Every nerve ending on my left side woke up, screaming for attention, hyper-aware of the heat radiating from her body. The cabin was temperature-controlled, perfectly cool, yet I felt a flush rising from my collarbone. "The view," she murmured, her voice vibrating through the armrest we now shared. She wasn't looking at the papers. She was looking out the oval window, where the world fell away into twilight. It changes everything from up here, doesn't it? The perspective shift. It was another trap, another invitation to be human, to be poetic. I looked out. I saw the clouds, vast and billowing, painted in hues of violet and bruising gray by the setting sun. They were magnificent. They were chaotic. And my brain, wired for risk assessment and profit margins, panicked. I couldn't find the words for beautiful. I couldn't access the vocabulary for awe. "The stratification," I said, my voice mechanical, a stranger's voice. "The density variance resembles the volatility index we saw in the Asian markets last quarter. Peaks of instability followed by a rapid plateau." I trailed off. I could hear myself. I sounded insane. I sounded like a machine trying to pass a Turing test and failing miserably. I was describing the heavens in terms of quarterly projections. Self-loathing pooled hot and heavy in my stomach. I was ruining this. I was proving Sarah right, that I was nothing but a suit with a pulse. I waited for the polite confusion. I waited for her to shift away, alienated by my inability to just be. But then a sound broke the cabin's hum. A laugh. It wasn't sharp. It wasn't mocking. It was low, rich, and genuinely amused. Chloe wasn't laughing at me. She was laughing at the sheer, unmitigated absurdity of the moment. The sound unraveled something tight in my chest. It wasn't the reaction I feared. It was acceptance. "Volatility index," she repeated, a smile audible in her tone. "Only you, Stella. Only you would look at a sunset and see a market correction." She didn't tell me to stop. She didn't tell me to be different. She just acknowledged the quirk with a kind of affectionate disbelief. Her hand moved on the shared armrest, her fingers uncurled, resting just inches from my own. She didn't touch me, not really. But she didn't pull away. She stayed in the space I had tried to fill with jargon. My hand remained on the keyboard, freezing. I should have moved it. I should have pulled back to the safety of my side. But I didn't. The proximity of her fingers, long, capable, relaxed, felt like a tether. I didn't move away. And in the silence that followed, that lack of movement, said more than any spreadsheet ever could. 3 hours into the flight, the cabin had transformed. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving us suspended in a twilight of recessed LEDs and the faint, bruising purple of the sky outside. The laptop screen had dimmed, its battery warning flashing unnoticed in the corner. We hadn't spoken much since the sunset, but the silence had changed texture. It wasn't the jagged, defensive silence of the takeoff. It was softer now, fluid, yet wrapped around a core of tension that hadn't dissipated. It had only concentrated. Chloe turned her seat fully toward me. The movement was deliberate, a shift in gravity that pulled my attention away from the contract clause I had been reading for the 45th time. "Why?" she asked. The single word hung there, vibrating in the pressurized air. I blinked, my eyes stinging from the screen glare. "Why what? The indemnity clause? It's standard practice to—" "No," she interrupted, her voice gentle but firm, cutting through my deflection like a laser through steel. "Why do you treat your life like it's a failing asset? Why do you never talk about anything that doesn't calculate?" The question didn't just land. It detonated. It bypassed my intellectual defenses, my pre-prepared PR statements, and struck the soft, unarmored underbelly of my insecurity. I opened my mouth to argue, to cite efficiency or professional boundaries, but the words withered on my tongue. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw no judgment, just curiosity. Deep, terrifying curiosity. I closed the laptop. The click was final. "Because I don't know how," I whispered. The admission felt like bleeding. I don't know the other words. I speak business. I speak strategy. I speak profit and loss. That's it. That's the only language where I don't have an accent. When I try to be casual, when I try to be just Stella, I feel like I'm traveling in a foreign country without a map. I waited for the pity. I waited for her to tell me to relax, to just be myself, the useless advice people always gave when they didn't understand that myself was a construct held together by sheer will. Chloe didn't offer platitudes. She nodded, a slow, thoughtful movement that acknowledged the weight of what I'd said without trying to lighten it. "I know," she said. "That's why I'm here." "To help with the transition," I said, grasping for the familiar context of the merger. "Sarah said your expertise would be crucial for the integration phase." Chloe smiled, but it was a different smile this time. Secretive, disarming. "Stella, I'm not here for the merger. I haven't looked at a single page of those documents." My brow furrowed. "But the contract, the retainer." "Sarah didn't hire me for the company," Chloe said, her voice dropping, becoming intimate. "She hired me for you." The world tilted. "For me?" "She called me 3 weeks ago," Chloe continued, her gaze never wavering. "She said her best friend was disappearing, that you were vanishing into your own company, becoming a ghost in a tailored suit. She said you needed an intervention, but you'd never agree to therapy. So she created a problem that only required a strategist, and she put us in a metal tube at 30,000 feet. I should have been furious. I should have been incensed at the manipulation, at the professional sabotage disguised as friendship. I was the CEO. I was the one who pulled the strings. I braced myself for the anger, waiting for the righteous indignation to flood my veins. But it didn't come. Instead, my chest tightened, a painful, squeezing sensation that felt alarmingly like relief. Someone had noticed. Someone had seen that I was drowning in the deep end of my own ambition and had sent a lifeline. The realization washed over me, cool and cleansing. I wasn't just an asset to be managed. I was a person to be saved. "You knew," I said, my voice trembling. "This whole time. You were testing me." "I wanted to see if she was right," Chloe affirmed. "If you were really that far gone." "And?" I asked, the word catching in my throat. Chloe leaned in. The space between us collapsed. Her eyes, dark and intelligent, locked onto mine with a force that pinned me to the seat. It wasn't a challenge. It was an anchor. "And," she said softly, "I think you're still in there. You're just hiding. And I'm very good at finding things that don't want to be found." I couldn't look away. I didn't want to. For the first time in years, I wasn't calculating the outcome. I was just existing in the moment, held in place by the gravity of her unflinching gaze. "Sarah," Chloe said. The name landed between us with the weight of a gavel strike, finalizing a verdict I hadn't realized was being deliberated. She told me about the last time you took a vacation, 3 years ago. You brought 3 phones and spent the entire week in the hotel room managing a crisis that your VP could have handled in an hour. The memory surfaced, sharp and unwanted. Sarah had stood in the doorway of that hotel room in Cabo, holding 2 margaritas that eventually melted into watery ruin while I screamed at a supplier over a mute button. I remembered the look on her face. Not anger, but a quiet, devastating resignation. She said you were disappearing, Chloe continued, her voice low, weaving through the steady drone of the turbines. She told me, Stella isn't running the company anymore. The company is metabolizing her. If someone doesn't pull her out, there won't be anything left but a job title and a trust fund. I looked down at my hands. They were clenched in my lap, knuckles white, holding onto my composure as if it were a physical object that could slip away. The betrayal tasted metallic in my mouth. I had trusted Sarah with the logistics of this trip because she was the only person who understood the stakes of the merger. Or so I thought. I thought she was worried about the deal, I said, my voice sounding brittle. She told me I needed a strategist because the acquisition targets were hostile. She said I needed armor. She lied, Chloe said simply. She didn't hire me to help you build armor, Stella. She hired me to dismantle it. The realization hit me in a wave of conflicting temperatures. The hot flush of humiliation, followed by the cold wash of clarity. The professional sabotage I had feared, the interference I had been guarding against since takeoff, wasn't sabotage at all. It was a rescue mission. Sarah hadn't sent a consultant to audit my performance. She had sent a demolition expert to break me out of my own life. For a moment, anger flared, bright, defensive, and familiar. It was the righteous indignation of the executive who hates being managed. How dare they? How dare they conspire behind my back, discussing my psychological state like a board agenda item? I wanted to open the laptop again. I wanted to retreat into the icy certainty of the numbers, to prove that I didn't need saving, that I was efficient, optimized, and perfectly fine. But the anger didn't hold. It couldn't find purchase on the smooth, undeniable truth of Chloe's presence. The fury dissolved, leaving behind a raw, aching gratitude that I didn't know how to express. Sarah saw me. Even when I had made it impossible to see anything but the CEO, my best friend had seen the woman suffocating underneath the blazer. She warned me, Chloe said, watching the emotions play out across my face. She shifted in her seat, crossing her legs, the movement creating a soft rustle of fabric that sounded impossibly loud in the quiet cabin. She said you would use work as a fortress. She said you would try to bury me in data and intimidate me with jargon until I gave up and let you work. I tried, I admitted, a ghost of a smile touching my lips. With the wine and the clouds. You did, Chloe agreed, her eyes dancing with that secret amusement. It was a valiant effort, very thorough. But Sarah told me that the fortress was just a facade. She said that inside there was someone worth fighting for. She asked if I was up for the challenge. And what did you say? I asked, though I already knew the answer. I told her I don't take easy jobs, Chloe replied. Her gaze held mine, steady and unnerving. I told her that if you were building walls that high, there must be something incredibly valuable you're trying to protect. I told her I wanted to see what it was. She accepted the challenge unflinchingly. She hadn't come here to fix a merger. She'd come here to find me. The cabin felt smaller suddenly, the space between the leather seats shrinking until the air felt thick, charged with a tension that had nothing to do with business. The hum of the jet faded into the background, leaving only the sound of my own breathing and the terrifying, wonderful realization that for the first time in a decade, I had nowhere to hide, and I didn't want to escape. It's not a fortress, I said finally, the words scraping against my throat. It's a bunker. I turned my head, resting my cheek against the cool leather of the headrest, looking at her. The cabin lights had dimmed further, casting long shadows that made her features sharper, more defined. People think I'm cold, I continued, the confession spilling out before I could check the metrics of vulnerability. They think I'm aloof, calculating. But the truth is, I'm terrified. Put me in a boardroom with a hostile takeover on the table, and I'm a maestro. I know exactly where everyone stands. I know what they want, what they fear, and exactly how much it will cost to make them go away. It's algebra. It's clean. I took a breath, the air in the cabin feeling too thin. But put me at a dinner party? Ask me to make small talk about the weather or hobbies? I freeze. I don't know the rules. There's no agenda. There are no minutes to approve. It's just chaos. Emotional calculus I never learned to solve. So I retreat. I pull up the spreadsheets because numbers never ask you how your day was, and then look disappointed by the answer. I waited for the judgment. I waited for the look I had seen on a dozen ex-partners' faces. The realization that the powerful, confident CEO was actually just a socially stunted workaholic who hid behind her net worth. Chloe didn't flinch. She didn't look disappointed. A small, thoughtful smile played on her lips, softening the intensity of her gaze. "You think that makes you broken?" she asked quietly. "I think it makes you honest." "Honest?" I let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "It makes me impossible." "No," Chloe corrected, shifting slightly. Her arm extended, draped along the back of my seat. She wasn't touching me, not yet, but her hand was there, inches from my shoulder, creating a perimeter, a claim. "It makes you transparent to anyone who actually pays attention. Most people I meet, the ones who thrive at those dinner parties you hate, they're just performing. They're reading a script. You're not scripting anything, Stella. You're just vibrating. You're so desperate to get it right that you short-circuit." "That sounds pathetic," I murmured. "It sounds human," she countered. "I spent 10 years working in crisis management before I went independent. I've spent my entire adult life in rooms full of people wearing masks. Politicians, celebrities, captains of industry. They all have a face they wear for the public and a face they wear for the mirror. And usually, both are fake." She paused, her eyes searching mine. "I learned to read the things people don't say. The twitch of a hand, the way someone checks their watch, the specific silence of a lie. It became a survival mechanism. If I could see the truth underneath the performance, I was safe. I could navigate." Her fingers drummed lightly on the leather near my neck. The sound was rhythmic, soothing. "When I look at you," she said, her voice dropping an octave, "I don't see a performance. I see someone who is tired of performing. I see someone who built a kingdom just to have a place where she understood the laws of physics." The accuracy of it stole my breath. "It's lonely," I whispered. The admission felt dangerous, like handing her a loaded weapon. "The kingdom, it's empty. Everyone who enters wants something. They want the capital, or the connection, or the prestige. They look at me and they see an opportunity. They see a stepping stone. Nobody just stays." I looked down at my hands, unclenched now, but trembling slightly. I stopped trying to make them stay. It was easier to just pay them to leave. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was filled with the hum of the engines and the sudden, overwhelming awareness of her proximity. Chloe moved. She leaned in, invading the scant personal space I had left. The scent of her, that rain and warm skin smell, washed over me, dizzying and grounding all at once. "Look at me," she commanded. It wasn't a request. I lifted my eyes. Her face was inches from mine. I could see the flecks of gold in her irises, the slight flare of her nostrils as she breathed. "I'm not on the payroll, Stella," she said. The words were slow, deliberate. "Sarah paid my retainer, and I'm going to return it. Every cent." My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "Why?" "Because I'm not working right now," she whispered. Her breath ghosted against my cheek, warm and alive. "And I don't want anything from you. I don't want your capital. I don't want your connections. I don't care about the merger." Her hand on the seatback shifted, her thumb brushing the fabric of my blazer, just barely grazing the skin of my neck. The contact sent a shockwave through me that had nothing to do with turbulence. "I see you," she said, the words landing with the weight of a vow. Not the CEO, not the title, not the net worth. I see the woman who describes clouds like volatility indexes because she thinks beauty needs to be justified. And I'm telling you, you don't have to justify anything to me. I stared at her, paralyzed not by fear, but by the terrifying possibility that she meant it. For the first time in my life, the math didn't work. There was no transaction here. There was just a woman, looking at me as if I were the only variable that mattered. And for once, I didn't want to solve for X. I just wanted to let the equation stand, unsolved and beautiful. The cabin had settled into a heavy velvet hush that felt almost sacred. The harsh overhead lights were gone, replaced by the amber glow of the floor lighting and the single focus beam of the reading lamp we shared. It carved out a private world in the darkness, a spotlight on the small table where the merger documents lay, ignored now, but serving as our pretext. "This clause," Chloe murmured. Her voice was a low rumble, barely audible above the whisper of the air conditioning. The one about retained autonomy. We were leaning in together, ostensibly to read, but the words on the page had blurred into meaningless shapes hours ago. What mattered now was the dangerous geometry of our bodies. My head was bent toward hers. When she shifted, the ends of her hair brushed against my cheek like spun silk, a distraction so potent it threatened to derail my entire cognitive process. "It's standard," I managed, my voice thick. "It guarantees operational independence." "Does it?" Chloe asked. She wasn't looking at me. Her eyes were fixed on the paper, but her focus was elsewhere. She extended a hand, her index finger tracing the line of text. It was a professional gesture. But as her finger reached the end of the sentence, the movement didn't stop. Her knuckle brushed against the inside of my wrist. It wasn't an accident. We both knew the difference. An accidental touch is quick, apologetic. This was slow, deliberate. It was a question asked in the language of skin. The contact lingered, a warm, steady point of pressure against the frantic pulse beating beneath my skin. I stopped breathing. The air in the cabin seemed to crystallize around that single point of contact. My wrist burned. The sensation traveled up my arm, hitting my chest with physical force. I should have pulled away. The CEO in me screamed to retreat, to reestablish the perimeter, but I didn't move. I couldn't. "Do you want autonomy, Stella?" Chloe whispered. Her finger rested against my pulse point, feeling the traitorous rhythm. "Or do you want to be known?" The question hung in the pressurized air, heavy and intoxicating. Autonomy was safe. Autonomy was lonely. Being known was terrifying. It required lowering the drawbridge and letting someone walk through my defenses. I looked at her hand. Her nails were short, practical, painted a deep dark red. Her skin looked soft against the stark white of the legal paper. Slowly, with the trembling hesitation of someone stepping off a cliff, I turned my hand over. It was a small movement, a rotation of the wrist. But in the context of my life, it was a revolution. I exposed my palm. I offered the soft, vulnerable underside of my armor. It was a surrender I hadn't planned, a white flag raised in a war I didn't know I was fighting. Chloe didn't hesitate. She didn't pause to analyze data or calculate risk. She simply slid her hand into mine. Her fingers interlaced with mine, sliding into the spaces between my fingers. Her grip was firm, warm, grounding. It happened underneath the document, hidden from the rest of the cabin, a secret handshake in the dark. The charge was no longer metaphorical. It wasn't just tension anymore. It was physical, electric, a circuit closing. The heat of her palm against mine felt like a brand. I stared at the paper, at the dry legal jargon, but all I could feel was the texture of her skin, the strength in her fingers, the absolute, undeniable reality of her hand holding mine. "I don't know," I whispered, the truth slipping out. "I don't know what I want." "That's okay," Chloe said, her thumb brushing softly against the back of my hand. "We can figure it out. We have time." She squeezed my hand, a silent reassurance. The cabin felt impossibly small, just the two of us suspended in the dark, hurtling through the stratosphere, anchored only by the terrifying, wonderful weight of our joined hands. The proximity wasn't just intense anymore. It was inevitable. And for the first time, the loss of control didn't feel like a failure. It felt like waking up. The movement was small, almost imperceptible to anyone who wasn't currently having their entire nervous system rewired by it. Chloe's thumb began to move against the sensitive skin of my palm. It traced slow, deliberate circles over and over again. Each rotation felt like it was erasing a line of code in my operating system, corrupting the files that told me how to be Stella the CEO, Stella the composed, Stella the untouchable. It was a dismantling, a systematic unbuckling of the armor I had spent 20 years forging in boardrooms and negotiation tables. The sensation traveled up my arm, bypassing the logic centers of my brain and hitting the limbic system with the force of a physical blow. I stared at our joined hands, watching the way her skin moved against mine, fascinated and terrified by the friction. It wasn't just a touch, it was an erosion. She was wearing me down, not with force, but with a softness I had no defense against. I tried to summon a strategy. I tried to pull up a mental spreadsheet of appropriate responses to intimacy in professional settings, but the file was corrupted. There was no precedent for this. There was no clause in the contract that covered the way her thumb brushed over my lifeline, making my breath hitch in my throat. The control I prized above all else, the control that had made me a millionaire before I was 30, was evaporating like mist in the morning sun. I was free-falling, and for the first time, I didn't know where the ground was. "I don't know how to do this," I whispered. The words scraped their way out of my throat, raw and unpolished. It was the most dangerous admission I had ever made. In my world, ignorance was death. You never admitted you didn't know the answer. You pivoted, you deflected, you bluffed. But here, in the dim amber light of the cabin, with Chloe's scent filling my lungs, I couldn't bluff. "I don't know the rules," I continued, my voice trembling. "I don't know the protocol. I don't know what comes next. I don't know how to be whatever this is." Chloe didn't freeze. She didn't pull away or look at me with the pity I feared. Instead, she moved. She lifted our joined hands, bringing them up from the table, up through the charged space between us, until she pressed my palm flat against the center of her chest. The contact was shocking. Through the silk of her blouse, I could feel the warmth of her skin, the solid reality of her ribcage. But more than that, I could feel the rhythm. "You're already doing it," she said. Her voice was steady, unflinching, a calm center in the storm of my panic. "There are no rules, Stella. There is no protocol. There's just this." Under my palm, her heart beat against my fingertips. It wasn't racing. It wasn't erratic like mine, which felt like a hummingbird trapped in a glass cage. Her heart was steady. Thump-thump. Thump-thump. It was a heavy, powerful rhythm, slow and assured. It was the heartbeat of someone who knew exactly who she was and exactly what she wanted. It was the most grounding thing I had ever felt. "Feel that?" she whispered, her eyes locking onto mine. "That's not strategy. That's just true." The contrast between the frantic staccato of my own pulse and the deep, resonant, steadying force under my hand was jarring. It forced me to synchronize. It forced me to slow down. I closed my eyes for a second, focusing entirely on that beat, letting it anchor me to the earth, to the moment, to her. When I opened them again, the fear hadn't vanished, but it had changed. It had transmuted into something else, something sharper, something that felt dangerously like hunger. I leaned in. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was a gravitational shift. My body, recognizing the source of the heat, simply gravitated toward it. I tested the space between us, invading the few inches of air that remained. I watched her eyes. I waited for the stop sign, for the retreat, for the moment she would realize she was holding hands with a woman who didn't know how to be human. But Chloe didn't retreat. She didn't flinch. Her chin tilted up slightly, baring the line of her throat. Her eyelids fluttered, closing just halfway, casting long shadows over her cheeks. It was an invitation. It was a challenge. It was the open door I had been too afraid to walk through for my entire life. "Stella," she breathed, and the sound of my name on her lips broke the last remaining lock on the bunker door. There was no going back now. The strategy was gone. The armor was gone. There was only the pull, undeniable and absolute. The moment our lips met, the entire narrative reset. The spreadsheet of my life, the rows and columns of carefully managed expectations and risk assessments, simply ceased to exist. It wasn't a gradual fade. It was a hard cut to black, followed immediately by an explosion of sensory input that my brain couldn't categorize. There was no data for this. There was no precedent. Chloe's mouth was soft, impossibly so. But there was nothing tentative about the way she kissed me. It was a strategist's precision applied to desire. She knew exactly where to apply pressure, exactly how to tilt her head to deepen the contact, exactly how to turn a simple touch into a seismic event. She wasn't asking for permission. She was confirming a hypothesis she had formed the moment I started babbling about cloud formations. It was a kiss that tasted like certainty. My free hand, the one not pressed against the steady, thumping drum of her heart, moved without a command from central processing. It found the column of her neck, my fingers sliding upward into the thick, soft waves of her hair. I gripped her, tangling my fingers in the blonde strands, anchoring myself to her as if the plane had suddenly gone into a nosedive and she was the only parachute. She tasted like the vintage red we had discussed hours ago, rich, tannic, complex. But underneath the wine was something uniquely her. It was the taste of warm skin and clean rain, a flavor that felt like a memory I hadn't made yet, but had always been waiting for. It was intoxicating, far more potent than the alcohol, and it went straight to my head, dismantling the last of my defenses. The kiss deepened. It shifted gears from an exploration to a necessity. A sound escaped my throat, a low, desperate noise that I would have been mortified by an hour ago. Now, I didn't care. The hunger I thought I'd starved, the need I had buried under layers of ambition, propriety, and tailored suits, woke up with a vengeance. It roared to life, demanding to be fed. I kissed her back with a boldness that surprised me. I pressed into her, my body straining against the seatbelt, trying to eliminate the frustrating inches of space the armrest created. I wanted to be closer. I wanted to be part of the same equation. It was unapologetic. It was raw. It was the first honest thing I had done in a decade. Chloe didn't retreat from my sudden, overwhelming intensity. She met it. She didn't flinch at the hunger. She welcomed it. Her hand moved from the seat back, sliding up the column of my spine until it cupped my jaw. Her thumb grazed my cheekbone, holding me steady, keeping me focused on the sensation of her mouth on mine. She was the anchor in the storm she had created. She explored me without hesitation, her tongue brushing against mine, tasting the desperation and the desire in equal measure. She wasn't afraid of the fire I was hiding. She was pouring gasoline on it, watching the bunker I had built around my heart turn into a blast furnace. The cabin, the hum of the engines, the merger documents on the table, it all fell away. There was only the heat of her skin, the strength of her hand on my face, and the overwhelming realization that I was alive. Not just functioning, not just operating, but burning. When we finally broke apart, it wasn't because we wanted to. It was because biology demanded oxygen. We pulled back just inches, our foreheads resting against each other, the air between us superheated and heavy. I was gasping, my chest heaving against the silk of my blouse, my composure shattered in the best possible way. I opened my eyes. Chloe was looking at me. Her pupils were blown wide, swallowing the gold, dark pools of desire that mirrored my own. Her lips were swollen, red, the lipstick smudged, a visible testament to the chaos we had just created. She didn't smile. She didn't look away. The look in her eyes was serious, intense, and filled with a promise that terrified and thrilled me. It said, "We are not going back." It said, "This wasn't an experiment." It said, "This is only the beginning." And for the first time in my life, I didn't need a strategy for what came next. The intercom chimed, a polite electronic intrusion that shattered the heavy, sacred silence we had built. The pilot's voice, calm and professional, announced our initial descent into Teterboro. Reality, which we had successfully suspended at 30,000 feet, was rushing up to meet us at 400 knots. The cabin pressure shifted, a subtle pop in my ears that signaled the end of our suspension in the void. Usually, this was the moment I re-engaged. I would check my phone, fire off 3 emails before we hit the tarmac, and mentally prepare the agenda for the car ride into the city. But my phone remained in my bag. The merger documents sat on the table, forgotten soldiers in a war I no longer cared about winning. Chloe didn't pull away as the plane banked, the lights of the Jersey sprawl tilting dizzily in the oval window. Instead, Her hand slid from my jaw, trailing down my arm with agonizing slowness, until it rested firmly on my knee. It wasn't a casual placement. It was a claim, a possessive weight that grounded me against the sudden return of gravity. I looked at her hand, the dark red nails against the charcoal wool of my trousers, and felt a surge of something that should have terrified me. I wanted that weight to stay there. I wanted it there in the car, in the elevator, in the boardroom. The landing, I murmured, my voice sounding husky, foreign to my own ears. It's happening. It is, Chloe agreed. She wasn't looking out the window at the approaching runway lights. She was watching me, her eyes tracing the line of my mouth where her kiss still burned. Back to the real world. I don't have a protocol for this, I admitted. The panic was there, fluttering at the edges of my mind, but it was duller now, muffled by the steady thump of her heart that I could still feel in my fingertips. When the door opens, I revert. The CEO comes back online. The armor engages. It's automatic. It doesn't have to be, she said. Her thumb pressed into the muscle of my leg, a point of focus. You can choose, Stella. You can choose to keep the door unlocked. I looked out at the city below, a sprawling grid of amber and white. For the first time, I didn't see a market to be captured or a demographic to be analyzed. I saw a place where people lived, where they went to dinner parties and didn't talk about EBITDA, where they held hands in the back of cars. What happens when we touch down? I asked. It was the only question that mattered. Do we shake hands? Do we exchange business cards and pretend this was just turbulence? Chloe leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper that vibrated against my skin. We figure it out together, unflinchingly. I'm not going anywhere, Stella. Unless you fire me. I can't fire you, I breathed. I don't even know what your job description is anymore. Good, she smiled, a wicked, beautiful curve of her lips. That means we have room to improvise. The landing gear deployed with a mechanical thud. The runway rushed up to meet us, a blur of concrete and blue guidance lights. The wheels touched down, a screech of rubber, a shudder of the airframe, but I wasn't there. The deceleration pushed us forward against the seatbelts, a physical force trying to separate us, but her hand tightened on my knee, anchoring me. I realized then that the boardroom, the merger, the legacy, it was all noise. This, the heat of her hand, the taste of her on my lips, was the signal. I had spent years tuning my receiver to the wrong frequency. The bold desire she had awakened didn't feel like a distraction from my work. It felt, for the first time, like absolute clarity. The jet taxied to a halt. The air stairs lowered, opening to a world that expected the old Stella. But as we stood, Chloe's fingers brushed mine one last time, a secret promise before we stepped into the floodlights. Sarah's intervention had worked better than she could have planned. If this story resonated with the quiet pull you feel, subscribe for more. Sometimes the best strategy is simply admitting you need someone who sees past your armor.